my screen. Can you see it? Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. My name is Amy Andrews. I'm the head of resourcing solutions here at Jobs Go Public, and I'm joined today by the lovely Jade Dunn, who is a career coach with a fertility lens, I should say, who is dedicated to helping people balance fertility challenges with their careers. So thank you very much, Jade, for joining us today. It's lovely to have you on our webinars. Lovely to share the limelight with other people in our webinars. So thank you so much for joining us. Like I mentioned, my name's Amy, and I've obviously got Jade here as well. So Jade is going to start off by going through a bit more about what she does, talking about fertility in a bit more of a context around careers. There is also a chat box, so if anybody does have any questions, there is a Q&A, and at the end, what we'll do is we'll go through some questions that anybody puts to Jade, and I'll have access to those. So it's just on a Q&A in your chat action point. So Jade, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, you're right. I am a career coach with a fertility lens, which is a bit of a mouthful, easy for me to say. Yeah, thank you so much, Amy, for having me, and welcome, as Amy said, to everyone on the webinar. So my name's Jade Dunn. I'm a career coach, and I'm going to talk today about career fertility friction, and how fertility challenges impact career, and why that's actually important for employers, why employers should care. Before I do get into that, though, just a massive, huge thank you to Jobs Go Public for giving the platform to talk about this and recognising it actually as such an important topic. As someone who myself has been through IVF, has been through pregnancy loss, and really struggled to manage those things with work, with my career, I know that it's such an important discussion to have. So it's amazing to have an organisation making it a topic of conversation for employers as well. So a huge thank you. So let's get into it. I think you've got the next slide, Amy. I just wanted to start by, I guess, giving a bit of an overview as to who I am, why I do what I do, and kind of what I'm all about. So I guess a little bit about me. So I'm a career coach. I coach with a fertility lens. What does that mean? I hear you ask. Yeah. So what that means is I help people to balance their fertility challenges, potentially fertility treatments, potentially pregnancy loss. I help people to balance those life events with work and with their careers. In a past life, I worked in HR, HR functions within banking, and more recently within retail. So I understand what that journey is like, both from an employer perspective, as it were, but also as someone who's been through those things myself and has had to juggle those things with work myself. So I know that fertility challenges, pregnancy loss, they really do impact your ability to be your best self at work. And that's what I help my clients to navigate. And I help them to navigate that in all its guises, because it can show up in different ways, depending on who you are, what your role is, and what your fertility challenges are as well. So a little bit about my own journey. So this is where it gets a little bit personal. Sometimes things can be a bit difficult to talk about, but it gets easier the more I talk about it. So I'll tell you a little bit about kind of where I've been and what my own experience with fertility challenges were. So all started with my husband, as you can imagine, with my husband and I trying to get pregnant. And that trying took longer than we expected for it to take, longer than average, should we say. And whilst that was all happening, I was in a role that I enjoyed. I think I was very good at it. Maybe you can ask my managers whether that's true or not, but I think I was very good at it.
Sure you were. I'm sure you were.
Thanks, Amy. But I kind of felt like I was almost kind of plateauing in my career. So it's something I could do with my eyes closed, as it were. And I was really thinking at that point in time that I wanted to change careers, but I couldn't because I was trying to get pregnant and I didn't want to miss out on maternity. And that's an experience that some people even on the call might even feel familiar with. I certainly hear it a lot, that I feel like I'm trapped in my role because if I get pregnant and I start a new job pregnant, I won't be eligible for maternity. So I was a little bit stuck with that particular situation. So that went on for a period of time, a long period of time. And eventually I did get pregnant, which was amazing, such an amazing feeling. But unfortunately, that pregnancy ended in miscarriage. I was 11 weeks pregnant, and it was a wholly traumatic experience, incredibly traumatic experience to lose that pregnancy, as you can imagine it would be. Despite it being as upsetting and traumatic as it was, I took 4 days off work after that pregnancy loss. Some people take less, some people don't take any time off work. For me personally, that wasn't enough. It absolutely wasn't enough. And hindsight is a wonderful thing to look back and say, well, why did you only take 4 days off work when that wasn't enough? And if I'm really frank, I think you have, for me personally, I had this view that, well, if I don't, I had a really busy role. So if I don't do this work, who else is going to? There's nobody else that I could hand the work off to. That wasn't true, but that's the story that I told myself. And I really thought in my mind that, you know, delusions of grandeur, the bank will fall over if I'm not here and I'm not doing my job, therefore I must come back to work as quickly as possible. Again, not true. I absolutely could have handed my work over to other people. So for one reason or another, I only took the 4 days off work. We'd been trying for a really long time for that pregnancy, and then, you know, sod's law, I actually managed to get pregnant quite quickly after my miscarriage. Don't know how that happened. Unfortunately, that pregnancy ended in miscarriage as well. So that was an early miscarriage, very early miscarriage. You might have heard of the term chemical pregnancy. Yeah,
yes, I've definitely heard that term before.
Yeah, so it was a chemical pregnancy. It ended very, very quickly, and that floored me. And it floored me because I hadn't taken enough time off work the first time around. So I ended up doing what I should have done the first time around and taking a prolonged period of time to recover and to recuperate. And that's where I learned, actually, I was able to do that the first time around. I was able to have that conversation with my manager, and she accommodated for my situation. And that's absolutely what I should have done that first time around. But we live and learn, hey. Obviously, my husband and I wanted to keep trying. We really wanted to get pregnant and to have that baby. So, but we knew that it had taken us a period of time to get pregnant. We knew that, you know, we've had a couple of miscarriages. I started to feel a bit worried about, well, it's taken me so long to get pregnant and I can't stay pregnant. What's going on there? With the NHS, you have to go through, you may or may not know this, you have to go through 3 miscarriages in a row before you can have any investigations. But I didn't want to wait. So we actually started that process ourselves, and I started the IVF process.
It's the not knowing as well.
Not knowing. And also you don't want to have another miscarriage before you have investigations as well, Amy. You don't want to have to kind of put yourself through that again. So you're it's the not knowing, and it's being fearful this is going to happen again before anyone starts to test me and work out what's going wrong. So I just wanted to bypass all of that and just go straight for the test and go for the IVF. So I actually, at the point where I was deciding to go for IVF, I was also going back to my career. I was thinking, right, well, I've been in this role for a long period of time. I want to progress. I might start looking internally rather than thinking about moving externally. So that was what I was thinking career-wise whilst all this was going on. Started the IVF process. Amy, I went through 8 rounds of fertility treatment. 8 rounds of fertility treatment. And to explain exactly what that looks like, because I think people think of the full IVF process, where it wasn't the full IVF process for every single round. So the first round was full IVF, where you are on all of the hormones so that you can start producing your eggs. They take the eggs out, that's called a retrieval, and then hopefully your eggs get fertilized and they're able to put one back in, and hopefully that embryo turns into a pregnancy. That wasn't what happened in my first round of IVF. My first round of IVF, unfortunately, my lining, my womb lining, didn't do what we wanted it to do, which turned out to be a bit of a theme with me and my body, and therefore all of my embryos needed to be frozen. So that's what's called a freeze-all cycle. So they froze all of my embryos ready to use at a later date, at a later cycle. So then the subsequent 7 rounds were what we call a frozen embryo transfer, or I should say attempts at frozen embryo transfers, because only 3 of those attempts resulted in a transfer. So it's a bit confusing. Hopefully everyone's still with me. So 4 of those attempts had to be cancelled because my lining didn't get to where we needed it to be, the right level of thickness. So that's 8 rounds of fertility treatment, 8 really relentless rounds of fertility treatment. as that was starting, I actually managed to find a new role within my organization. So I was in a new job, new manager, trying to establish myself in that new role whilst I've got all of this relentless IVF procedure going on in the background. So it was really, really difficult to.
And it's not an overnight thing. It's like months and years and taking a long time. It's not an instant.
It's not instant, which I thought it would be, Amy. I thought I would go in and would shake the doctor's hand and get pregnant. That's not what happened.
Baby, please.
Exactly. That's really not what happened. So it was like, if I'm really honest with you, it was like a relentless trauma of trying to get pregnant for as long as it took us, then going through the pregnancy losses, then going through all of these rounds of kind of failed tests first, and then surgeries, and then all of these rounds of failed treatment. It was really difficult, and eventually it did see me having to take an extended period of time off work. For the term that was used was trauma-related anxiety. So I found myself in a situation where it was all so much. And what that really speaks to is how hard it is to balance work and fertility, because it's just a lot. It's just a lot that you have going on. And because I like to make my life difficult, I decided to throw more on top of that. And I trained to be a coach whilst all of this was going on as well. And I initially trained to be a coach because I thought it would, and it would certainly have been very helpful for my HR career. That was my initial plan. But actually, whilst I was going through my coach training, I thought, do you know what? I really want to use my coach training, my experiences, and my HR background to help other people who are going through this, because I did learn as I was going through it how many people this actually impacts. For some reason, you don't talk about it. We don't talk about it in the workplace. And when you start going through it and you do start talking about it, you realize that actually there are 3 or 4 other people in your department who are also going through it as well. Why were we not talking before? Who knows? So I really wanted to make sure that I was able to help other people. And I think, like, when I reflect, Amy, on my situation, like, everything felt like a first for me. So I was really unprepared for, like, the whole process. There was like no blueprint for me to follow. There was no, like, this is how to deal with your fertility challenges at work. This is how to deal with talking to your manager about it. This is how to deal with feeling overwhelmed, with feeling stressed. No blueprint at all. And what's funny about that is, you know, working in HR, I can remember being involved in organizing like these really great like panel events that are supposed to inspire people to apply for, you know, go for promotions, etc., etc. And you'd always have invariably like a senior, because you want a diverse panel, you'd have a senior female on the panel, and someone would always ask the question around, how did you get to where you were and balance family life or whatever? So you'd have someone talking about how to be successful as a mother in the workplace, but I never ever saw anybody talking about or how to be successful as someone who's trying to be a mother and who's really overwhelmed by that. No one ever tells you how to do any of that. It's just not something that we speak about. So this is kind of why I do what I do now, is because I want to normalize it and I want to help other people through it, because I was flying blind, if I'm completely honest with you.
I mean, it's like you say, you start a conversation with somebody and you realize 2 or 3 people are going through the same story or have gone through similar situations. And it's not until you start talking about these things that it makes a difference. It helps someone that might be early on in their journey or further down the line that you can help and share, because it is you sometimes you're doing it in the dark. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what's going on. You're speaking to doctors and nurses that are very process what's going to happen, not actually how you're feeling. And it can be quite daunting, traumatic, scary, emotional, roller coasters, all of the above.
All of the above, exactly. And what you're talking about there, Amy, is just normalizing this conversation, just making it easier for people to feel not alone, to feel like, oh, it's not just me, other people are experiencing this as well, but also to make the conversation less taboo, so it's easier to start talking about it. And that's not to say that everybody should talk about it. Not everybody, you know, the things that I've just said, I've said them a few times now, so it gets easier the more you do say it. But not everybody's going to be there. Not everybody's going to want to talk about it. But if the conversation is normal in the workplace, at least you know you can, if you do want to, ever. And then I think if you just flick to the next slide. So what I wanted to do was just illustrate, I guess, with this slide, like what career fertility friction is and what it's like to actually juggle the two. So I coined the term career fertility friction. I don't think anyone was saying it before I was, so I should trademark it really. But what I'm trying to illustrate, I think, with this slide is that on the one side, you've got work, and we know that work is difficult for all the reasons that we go home at the end of the day and we're exhausted, and we all have different jobs. But I think the common theme amongst all of us is that our careers in one way or another can be really hard. But then if you put on top of that the experience that you go through with your fertility challenges, well, they're hard because, and it's multifaceted, right? There's not just one thing that's difficult about fertility challenges. So I've broken it down into 3 buckets. There potentially could be more, but I think they neatly fit into these 3 buckets. You've got the physical, so the hormones that you, the drugs that they give you to induce hormones, or the hormones that they give you, they're mood altering. There were times that I thought I'd completely lost the plot. I think my husband would say there were times I actually did lose the plot. There are times when you start to think, gosh, I've become somebody completely different. I'm responding to situations in a completely different way than I used to. So you've got the physical, you're going through tests, you're going through surgeries. I talked a little bit about kind of the stimulation that you have to make you produce eggs. That physically makes your ovaries huge, like huge, and you feel so bloated and full, and then having to like sit in a meeting or go through calls when you're feeling so uncomfortable. So it's really physical, the whole process. It's a really physical upheaval on your body. And then it's not just about kind of what's actually happening physically to your body, but it's an emotional upheaval as well. There's a study, a really interesting study done by Fertility Network UK and Middlesex University. In fact, I think it would be good if we email around to everybody so they can actually see this white paper. I'll send you a link. But there's lots of research done around the effects of infertility. And of all the people surveyed in this study, 90% of the people who were experienced long-term infertility reported feeling a sense of depression. That doesn't surprise me at all, because that's absolutely my experience. And what might be even more shocking is that 42% of the respondents of that survey actually reported feeling suicidal. So that just goes to show and demonstrate how serious this actually is. And I'll try and break that down, and I'll try and illustrate for you why it can sometimes feel so depressing. When you're trying to get pregnant and you're unable to get pregnant, like before you even get to the IVF side of things, it's like a hope disappointment cycle. So it's one of those things where every month you say to yourself, this might be my month, and you pick yourself up, you try exactly, you try, and then you wait. 2-week wait is like torturous, and then you're not pregnant, and at successive times that becomes quite crushing. And every time you realize that you're not pregnant, you have to pick yourself straight back up again. You don't get long to be upset about it. You pick yourself back up, you try again, and that becomes quite a relentless hope disappointment cycle. And then you add on to that fertility treatment that may or may not work. In fact, oftentimes the first round of fertility treatment doesn't work. It's just continuous hope disappointment cycles. And the thing is with your fertility jet, normally when you do something that impacts your mental health, you stop doing that thing. So if you're in a job that you don't like and it's impacting your mental health, maybe causing a bit of burnout, you leave that job. Same with a relationship. Now, I know some people, sometimes you're in a situation you can't leave a relationship, but for the most part, if you are able to, you leave that relationship when it's impacting your mental health. But when you're going through fertility challenges and that's impacting your mental health, you don't just say, I'm just going to stop. It's really difficult to make that decision. You just keep trying, you keep running straight into that fire month after month. So that's why it can be such an emotional upheaval. And then the obvious bit is the finance. So it's really expensive. Fertility treatment is incredibly expensive. It is available on the NHS, but not everybody's eligible. I wasn't eligible for NHS treatment. Even if you are eligible, you're only eligible for 1 or 2 rounds, depending on where you're located as well, which is incredibly unfair.
Postcode lottery, really, isn't it?
Lottery, exactly that. And you know, when you do start having to pay for the fertility treatment yourself, those costs can really add up, which then that becomes an emotional stress as well, because you're thinking, how am I going to pay for this? So if you think about it, if you think about those two things, we know work is hard for all the reasons that we know work is hard. You put on top of that everything that you've got going on with regards to your fertility challenges. It's like oil and water. Those two things don't go well together. You don't suddenly become able to deal with more stress. Your capacity for stress remains the same. It's a fixed sum. So when you're adding more stress on, well, how do you cope with that? And that is what essentially can lead to burnout. And that's what essentially can be quite overwhelming. And that's when my clients tend to come to me. And then on the next slide, Amy, did you hear my dog barking in the background there?
I heard a little something, a little peep.
Okay, well, it's quite loud. It's quite loud from this end. So this is when my clients tend to come to me, is when they're feeling one, some, all of these things here. So these are the things that people tend to feel when they're going through fertility challenges and when they're balancing them with their career. It's certainly how I felt at times. And if you think about when we talked about how many people this impacts, so we talked about, you know, you start talking about it, there's 3 or 4 people in your department who say they've been through it. Well, in actual fact, it's 1 in 6 people, 1 in 6 couples who struggle with fertility and trying to get pregnant. If you add on top of that the number of same-sex couples who are likely to have to use fertility treatment to get pregnant, if you add on top of that the number of single people who are trying to get pregnant and they likely to have to use fertility treatment, that's a lot of people going through these things that I've outlined on this slide in your organisation. So if we talk about stress and overwhelm, I think I've quite neatly illustrated how stressful the whole process can be. But you know, when you've got a stressful job, adding fertility treatment on top, that can cause a lot of overwhelm. The depression I've spoken about, those 90% of people that responded to that survey talked about feeling depressed. The exhaustion is not just the exhaustion of like the practical stuff, going to your appointments and, you know, managing all of that. But what can become really exhausting is the masking, because you're going into work every day and you're putting on a brave face and you're saying, I'm okay, when in actual fact, you're not okay. That in and of itself, and suppressing emotions, that can be really exhausting. You think about the times when you put on a brave face and you've just really felt a bit poo in the background, you get home from work and you feel like knackered. You think about doing that every day, the longer and longer you do it, it's exhausting.
And people ask you, are you all right? I'm fine, absolutely fine.
Yeah, you start sort of twitching. Fine.
Yeah, it's exhausting, but it is.
Yeah, exactly. And it can actually result in reduced confidence as well. So when you go through this for a really long period of time and you're masking and you're pretending you're okay, you can start to become quite uncertain of yourself. And you can start to get, you know, self-criticism creeps in. You can start to really doubt your ability, your capability. Sometimes if you've been, if you know that you don't have the capacity to work at the same pace that you used to work before, you might tap the brakes a little bit, rightly, because you want to make space for your fertility journey. But then you start to think, oh, people might think that I'm not good anymore because I'm not working in the same way that I used to. And then you start to believe that about yourself. So there's all these different things telling you you're not good enough. The secret grief is a really interesting one, because sometimes more often than not, actually, when you experience a pregnancy loss, people don't even know that you're pregnant in the first place. So you're having to go into work and, you know, if somebody, heaven forbid, if somebody passes away in your family, you don't normally go into work and pretend that hasn't happened. But with pregnancy loss, that's exactly what you do. And then it doesn't just have to be about actually losing a life, losing a pregnancy. Sometimes you can grieve for the pregnancy you never had as well. And having to deal with that in work is really difficult. And then the worry and anxiety, I spoke a little bit about my own anxiety. When you're dealing with all these things, when things don't go to plan, when things don't start to not work, you can feel really anxious. And that can creep into work as well, because anxiety isn't something that, you know, is always really localized and focused on one particular thing. It can creep into other things and you start to worry about everything, essentially. So that's how people kind of experience or can experience career fertility friction. And then I know, Amy, we were going to have a bit of a conversation, weren't we, around why does it matter? Why does it matter to employers?
Exactly. So I have got a bit of a poll question for people on the call today. So if you bear with me 1 second, I'd be really keen to find out, let me just do this poll. So are fertility challenges a topic that are discussed in your organisation? It'd be really interesting to hear from the group if they are talked about at all. If they're not, there seems to be a over resounding not at all. So I'm going to end it on that note. Basically 100% of everybody on the call today is not talked about at all. So that is a bit of a sad result, not unsurprisingly though, that people don't talk about it. I mean, when you were having fertility challenges, Jade, did you tell your employer? If so, what did they do? How did they help?
Yeah. So did you just hear the howling in the background? That was my dog there. No, you
didn't hear it. Didn't hear it.
That might pepper the rest of our conversation. Yeah, look, it doesn't surprise me at all that employers are not talking about this, because it definitely is something that is a little bit taboo. I do think that the conversation and the momentum around the conversation is starting to pick up. And I think that is, if I'm honest with you, off the back of people starting to talk about menopause. And I think people are just starting to get a bit more in tune with the fact that, you know, our reproductive lifespan does impact how we show up at work as well. So I do think that's a good thing. And we're talking about it now. So you know, exactly. So people are going to go away, and hopefully it's triggered a bit of a conversation in the workplace. But your question was around kind of what I told my manager.
Yeah. Did you tell them at all? Did you have that conversation?
I did. And look, I don't think that I had a plan around it as well. So all of these things started to happen kind of almost organically. And I don't think I went in thinking this is exactly what I'm going to say. This is how I'm going to say it. And this is what I need from them. And I think that what I needed from them evolved as well as I went through the whole process. So when you're going through fertility challenges and you're just struggling to get pregnant, like that's definitely not something you tend to talk about in the tea room and you talk about with your colleagues at all. That's not kind of general chit chat. But I think that as things started to get difficult, and as I started to hit the more kind of, you know, the bigger ticket events, to put it crudely, that's when it felt necessary to me anyway, and this is different for everybody, it felt necessary to talk about it. So I'm talking about the pregnancy loss for sure. That was something that I needed to, you know, I remember it happening in the morning, and I had a really busy day planned ahead, and I needed people to kind of step in and pick stuff up for me that day, go into meetings and lead things for me. So I told my manager, this is what's happening, this is why I'm in hospital, and can you sort stuff out for me? So I don't think I told her because I don't think what was going through my mind was, I feel ready, I feel like I trust her. It was more a panic, I need to sort things out, I need to do. Yeah, exactly. So by which time she knew, and that was fine. She completely understood. And then when it came to the IVF, I mean, that was a new manager. It was a new manager. I'd stepped into a new role, and I remember being really nervous about telling her. I felt like I had to tell her because I knew that I would need to go to lots of appointments. I didn't know how many appointments and how long it was all going to take, but I knew that that was what needed to happen. And I wanted to be transparent. I didn't want to lie to a new manager. But I was really nervous about what she'd think. Like, I thought, oh, she's going to think, why has she just joined this team and she's going to go off and get pregnant? She's going to think, I projected all these fears into that conversation, but they turned out to be fears that weren't realized. She just got it straight away. She was like, that's really exciting. Interestingly, I did feel excited at the time, so I resonated with what she said, but interestingly, that's probably not language that I would advise using, saying to somebody that's exciting, because as it transpires, the whole process was more than unexciting. So that's definitely language I wouldn't recommend using, but at the time that didn't impact me because I didn't realize how difficult it was all going to be. But she had like an awareness of the whole IVF process, so she understood. I didn't have to explain at length, these are the appointments that I'm going to have to go to. I can't tell you exactly when the appointments are going to be, because it's all about how my body responds as to how often I'm going to have to go, etc. So she knew all of that stuff already, because she had an awareness of IVF, which made the whole process so much easier. So all of my fears were alleviated instantly. It was such a relief. It was fantastic. What I would say, though, is that not everybody has that experience, and also not everybody wants to talk to their managers. So if you're on this call and you are HR or you're a manager, I think that unfortunately you do have to accept that you may never know who's going through their fertility challenges. But that doesn't mean, like, you can, as an employer, you can really impact somebody's experience without knowing who that individual is. So that I think there's a difference between awareness of the fertility as a situation and an event that people go through, and an awareness of who exactly is going through that situation as well. So I do think that's an important difference there. What else was really, really important to me in terms of when my manager was kind of supporting me? I think what I needed from her was patience, because the whole process was long. I needed from her a level of flexibility and a level of trust as well, that when I go to my appointments, I'm going to pick things up in the evening, or I'm going to make my hours up. And I absolutely did do that. So I needed for her to trust me. I needed for her to understand that the whole process was unpredictable as well. So I couldn't say, I'm going to go for X amount of appointments and they're going to be on this date, and this date. So I needed her to really kind of understand that. I think the one red flag, though, Amy, that I would give to employees and to managers around talking about your situation is that it's really helpful to be transparent, but there is a point where you can sometimes, depending on who you are, you can feel a bit exposed as well. So when things started to not go well for me, I talked about how that word exciting, like, I felt excited at the start. Yes, that was a word that was appropriate to use at the beginning, but by the end, when I was going through all these cycles that weren't working, I knew that she knew what I was doing. And there was I felt like, oh, she's going to want to know if it was successful, and it wasn't. And I feel really sensitive about that. And you almost feel like you're a bit on womb watch, like, are you pregnant or are you not? And that can feel a bit uncomfortable. So I don't really know how to resolve that issue for people. What I would say is that you should be, I think the employee should be really mindful that you have the potential to feel exposed, and get your head around there might be a point where you might want to say, I don't want to talk about this anymore, and find the right way to say that. And then for the manager to also think, I want to make clear to my employee that I'm here to listen, but also if they don't want to talk about it, I'm also okay with that as well. So it's a really delicate line for managers, actually. So I don't envy them that.
Yeah, I think it's probably, I mean, we've talked at length before we've obviously run this session today, that it is difficult, because yes, they are excited because they want you to see you go through that journey. It's just like friends and family. They want to know if it's gone well. They want to be pleased for you, want to be happy. But obviously it's that fine line of, you've got to sort of say, well, actually, I don't want to talk about it. Like you say, I will come to you when I'm ready to talk. So it is that's fine line. What were some of the challenges you experienced within your journaling work?
Yeah, loads. I think the biggest thing for me was how long the whole thing took. So as I said before, I really thought that I would go in and I get like pregnant really quickly. And that's a bit of a misconception actually about IVF, that you get pregnant like the first round. That certainly wasn't the case for me, and it's not the case for the majority of people. So how long it all took, I think, was a real challenge for me. Also how much it impacted my confidence as well. I wasn't prepared for that at all, and it took me a really long time to understand that that's what was happening as well. Some of it was the fact that I was in a new job and I was sort of getting my feet under the table and having to establish myself in this new job. But because everything outside of work was so overwhelming and making me feel so uncertain of myself, it was really difficult actually to come in and get good at what I was doing. So that was really challenging as well, kind of that impact on my confidence. I wasn't prepared for it, and I didn't necessarily understand that that's what the reason was as well. I understand it very clearly now with perfect hindsight. Another thing that was really difficult as well when thinking about it with work is watching peers, their families grow and feeling a real sense of, like, if I'm really frank with the word, jealousy around that. And one thing my manager did that was really like the most amazing, impactful thing that I don't think she really realized how impactful it actually was somebody in my team was pregnant, and she was going to announce her pregnancy in our next team meeting, and my manager gave me a heads up. She sent me a text message. She made sure that I wasn't in that meeting blindsided by that news. And she wouldn't have been able to do that had I not been transparent with her about my journey. She sent me a text message saying, so and so is going to announce that they're pregnant. It's very welcome to not be in that meeting and say that you've got a clash. If you want to, it's entirely up to you. What would you like to do? And because I'd had the heads up, I decided, actually, I want to be in the meeting. I want to celebrate this person's pregnancy. I know that it's coming, so I can practice my happy face. And that meant so much. It meant that my manager had been really thoughtful. She thought of me, and she gave me an out. So she put the control back in, on my side of the court as well, as to whether or not I wanted to be there. So I really, really valued that. But yeah, it is difficult hearing about other people's pregnancies when you're grieving yourself or whatever. So I think that's a good bit of advice actually for employers and for managers, to just be really mindful of, when you're having those pregnancy announcements, when you're doing baby showers, when you're signing people's, they're going off to maternity cards and things like that, that you might have someone who's secretly really hating everything about it. So you've got to be sensitive to that.
And they've disappeared because they don't want to be part of it, which is absolutely right for them. If they don't want to be a part of it, obviously, like you say, given the heads up. So I imagine many employees don't realise how much of a big impact fertility challenges have on their employees' careers. What do you think is the biggest consideration?
For me personally, it's confidence. And I say that not just because of my personal experience, but also thinking about conversations that I have with clients, and some of the webinars and some of the panel events that I do. Some of the discussion tends to be around confidence. And to expand on that a little bit, so if you think about it from a diversity perspective, if you think about the fact that women already have a situation where we go into work and we feel a sense of imposter syndrome of, am I good enough? Am I going to get found out that I'm not good enough, etc. You've already got that kind of that feeling that some women, not everybody, but you can sometimes bring into work, that can make it really difficult for you to be your best self. And then I think about it from, well, I'm a Black woman, and I also have on top of that a sense of imposter syndrome because of my ethnicity as well, because of my race. Then you add on top of that, I've got fertility challenges that are also making me feel very, very uncertain, and undoubtedly are affecting my performance because I'm a human. So you have all of these things that kind of chip away at your sense of, am I good enough? And they don't go away, because we talked about that hope disappointment cycle as well. So they chip away, and it swells, it grows to a real kind of really loud voice actually in your head saying, you're not good enough. They're going to work out that you're not good enough, or they're just pretending they think that you did a good job. And you kind of tell yourself all of these really negative things. So confidence actually, I think, is really, really important. And some of that comes from the masking that you do as well. You can't pretend for forever. It's not sustainable to pretend forever that you are confident. The other thing that I think is really a very big challenge in terms of balancing it with your career is feeling like you're frozen in time. So I talked about how the fact that I felt like I couldn't change jobs because I was holding out for that maternity. So that's one reason you can be frozen in time. But another reason is because you just know that actually I've only got so much capacity for stress, therefore I'm not going to go for a promotion, or I'm not going to stretch myself as much as I might otherwise stretch myself, because I want to make space for my fertility challenges. And then you can kind of start to think, you do that for a period of time, and then you start to think, oh, hang on a second, I don't want to be stuck here at this stage in my career. I do want to progress. And then that can feel quite conflicting. So that can sometimes be quite uncomfortable. And then the other thing is that nobody really knows what's going on. So whether or not you've told your manager, they don't really know how you feel about your situation. And sometimes when people don't know what's going on, and they don't understand what's going on, your peers, your manager, whoever it might be, you're always thinking, what do they think about me? What do they think about my performance? So you're kind of, you're really distracted, I guess, by the fact that other people don't have the full picture of everything that's going on. So you start to fill the gaps and you think, well, they just don't think I'm very good at my job, stuff like that. So all of these things can really sometimes affect somebody's performance and their perspective on their ability as well.
Yeah, it's sort of adding extra pressure that you think it's a hard place to be in, because you think that everybody's watching. You think because they don't know, am I performing well, am I performing not? It's like you say, it's imposter syndrome of how you feel like you are and what you can be doing work. So it's really hard. What did you get from work, and what was the most value, what support did you get from your employees at the time?
Yeah, excuse me, I was actually really lucky in terms of financial support, actually. And I know not everybody has access to this, but my employer at the time, when I was going through my fertility treatment, my IVF, we had a really amazing, they still have it, amazing health benefit as part of our health insurance, I should say, where they funded IVF up to a certain financial amount, but they did fund IVF cycles. So that was the most, in terms of, amazing, in terms of monetary value as well. The one caveat I would say with that, so some organizations are picking this up, and I'm definitely noticing a growth, I guess, in that level of kind of health insurance. But the one caveat I would say is that for me, they covered my IVF cycle. But remember, I talked about needing the frozen embryo transfers, and my insurance didn't cover the frozen embryo transfers. So the only way it transpired that I was able to actually have a full fertility treatment, as in put the embryos in, because that's where they need to be in order for me to get pregnant. I don't get pregnant with them in the freezer, was to fund the frozen embryo transfers myself. And that transpired as we were kind of in the middle of the process, which actually ended up being quite a lot to process. So for any organizations that are thinking of doing adding that to their health insurance, I think that might be something to just think through. You're going to say something?
I was going to say, you'd think you'd get it all if it's covered. You'd think everything was covered.
I'd like to use my embryos, please.
Can I check them out, please? They're just wait for me whenever you're ready.
But that was really amazing. But I recognise that that's really expensive. Not all organisations are going to be able to fund people's health insurance to that extent. But what was also really helpful was had a really robust occupational health support. So I had, when I went through my pregnancy loss, I had a counsellor that was completely funded by my health insurance, all packaged within the occupational health support. The same when I needed time off for my anxiety. After I'd been through so many rounds of IVF, that was really, really comprehensive level of support. Just having that support from my manager as well, her understanding, the flexibility to say, if you need an appointment, you need to go to see that doctor, you go. Don't even feel like you need to explain to me what's happening. I completely trust you as well. I really, really valued that level of trust. And this is the thing, right? Not everybody has a manager like that, and I don't think it should be potluck. I don't think it should be that, I had this manager who was really, really good, but other people might have a manager that they don't feel that they can have that conversation with. So going back to what we were talking about before around kind of raising awareness, I think the more we talk about it, the more tools all managers will have to be humans and respond in the right way.
Do you think that having a female manager was one of the reasons why you had a good experience with her? Do you think it would have been different if it had been a man had been your manager?
That's a great question. And
sorry, I've just thrown that one out to you, Jade.
No, it's a great question. And I think about that quite a lot. And so I've always worked in HR, right? So they've always been quite female. I mean, that's a that's a challenge for HR. I think that HR should be more diverse. You should have more men in the environment. But so it would be difficult for me to say, because I don't have male managers to compare and say, oh, would I have been able to talk to so-and-so? I think I probably would have found it more challenging to talk to a male manager about essentially my womb. I think that's the nervousness of saying I'm going for, you know, a scan. Well, a scan means it's an invasive procedure. I think I might have felt a little bit of embarrassment about being as transparent. Would I have told them broadly what was happening? I think I probably would have told them broadly, but without going into as much detail and without kind of having those really, really open conversations in the way that I was. So maybe it's something in between.
Yeah, I suppose it's difficult because obviously you don't know, but I'm sure there's obviously this webinar is recorded, and obviously we catering for the masses here in terms of people who wanted to register for the webinar. So I think it's like you said, we're starting conversation, opening these conversations, because as male managers of female teams, it could be happening in their teams and they just don't know, and creating an environment and a safe haven for people to come to you with their questions, and letting them know what's going on in your life. Because I mean, as a manager that manages male members of my team, I always start my meetings with how's things going, because I want to make sure that they can come to me if they've got an issue. And obviously there's lots of things going on, there's cost of living crisis, there's all sorts of things going on in the world. I want to make sure that people can come to me and yes, they've got an issue, there's something not quite right. I'm all ears, and I want to try help as much as I can. So there'll be lots of employers on the call who are probably going to go away and have a think about their own policies and best practices. What do you think that some of the best practices should be, some easy wins that you would suggest to managers in this team? I have got a couple of questions also come through on the chat. If anybody does have any more questions, we've got about 10 minutes left. So if anybody does have any more questions that they want to put to you, Jade, I'm going to just ask for them now, because I'm going to ask more questions from the chat after you've answered.
Yeah, sure. And just something you said about kind of male managers and also male members of the team as well. I think it's really important, before I do answer that question, Amy, I do think it's really important to recognise that this is not just a female issue as well. So, you know, when you talk about heterosexual couples, there is somebody else in that couple, and it's the infertility doesn't always just sit with the female as well. Sometimes it's male factor infertility as well, and if it's not male factor infertility, the partner will be supporting their other half and going through that whole process with them as well. So I think it sometimes can be a bit of a misconception that this is just an issue that impacts women, and it is as stressful for the other half. I can definitely attest to that. I don't have my husband on the call, but he would attest to that as well. It's as stressful for them as it is for us. And then also just going back to the point around kind of same-sex couples, single people, etc. So it's an everybody issue.
So I'm just going to add another question. Did your husband have conversations with his work about what was happening?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I don't think he would have spoken about it as explicitly as I was speaking about it. And I don't know whether that's because of his relationship with kind of his manager or whatever, but for whatever reason, he didn't speak about it in quite the same way. I definitely know that with pregnancy loss, that was definitely spoken about in the office. But I think that there is a bit of for men, sometimes it can sometimes feel like a bit of a different experience for them, because they have a bit of a sense that they want to envelop us because we've been through the pregnancy loss. And quite often you'll find in a couple, the question gets asked the man, how is she, rather than how are you as well? And they've also experienced that grief. They've also experienced the same level of loss. And I do think that's such a shame that the perspective externally is that the grief sits with the female.
Yeah, it's like women seems to be more talking about it. It's like you say, it's how's your wife, how's she doing? Well, how am I? I'm hurting too.
Exactly. You did ask me a question that I haven't answered.
I did, yeah. So how would you? So what are some easy wins that you can suggest for managers on the call today?
Easy wins. So a selfish self-plug in terms of easy wins is I definitely think that diversifying if you have a slate of coaches, leadership, career coaches, diversifying that slate to include people who deal with fertility and other issues as well, I think is so, so important to talking to all of the experiences that your people will have been through, because your people is not a homogenous group. It is a group of individuals, and we've all been through so the more that you can cater to those experiences by having coaches who deal with fertility, having coaches, there are some great coaches that deal with menopause in relation to career, some fantastic coaches in a more established field, which is return to work after maternity. If you have coaches of color, people who have different ethnicities as well. And the reason that's really important is because coaching's expensive, and the more efficient you can be with those conversations, the more, if you can get straight into the issue at hand rather than spending a lot of time kind of explaining to your coach or building up that level of trust where you feel comfortable to talk about these issues, the more you can just get straight into it with somebody who understands, the more effective that coaching relationship is going to be. So I do think diversifying your slate of leadership and career coaches, if you work with such a group, is really, really important. Shameless plug.
So managers don't have to have all the answers.
Exactly.
That's the whole point. They can signpost, they can say, right, speak to this person, have a conversation with this person.
And sometimes it's easier for an employee to have that conversation with somebody external, somebody who's got no skin in the game at all, someone who's not part of your team or part of your leadership team, because then you can be really, really honest about your situation, and you can have everything out on the table in a way that you might not necessarily be able to do with your manager. And then the other thing that I think is another easy win is around creating psychological safety within your organization. So yes, we could talk about policy changes, and you could talk about having all of the right rules for the road and all of the right kind of regulations for people to follow, which is very, very important. But actually what really mattered to me when I think about it was the culture within my organization that created the environment for my manager to be a human to me and to treat me as an individual. And the way that you create that's through leadership, that's through your leaders creating that kind of environment and really showcasing best practice as to how to be a good manager. So if you think about, well, do your managers have the space to be empathetic? Do your managers have the space to be humans, or are they so focused on kind of the productivity? Are you rewarding and recognizing those behaviors as well as all of the output that you're expecting from your teams? I think it's so, so important to remember that as well. And I guess the payoff is if people feel like they're recognized as individuals and their individual situations, in my case, fertility challenges, then you're going to be more committed, you're going to be more productive, you're going to be more engaged, you're more likely to stay within the organization. So there certainly is a payoff when it comes to creating that psychological safety. And the way that you do that is by having conversations like this one. You can utilize like your employee resource groups, if you've got like family and carers networks, women's networks, whatever the diversity networks that you might have, they're really great forums to start to have conversations like this. Because if you have conversations like this, it just opens the door for people to say, my organization recognizes this as an issue, and this is a safe space for me to have this issue. And it just starts to create that general sense of, I can have stuff going on outside of work and my organization will put their arms around me.
So one of the questions that have come in, Jade, is about how an employee can give flexibility. However, there is sometimes no flexibility within their role, if you know what I mean. There's like not cover or things like that. How can they compensate that?
Yeah, and that can be really, really challenging. And that's something I think that's really important for you to discuss with the team member as well. So I think that I took the responsibility of actually saying to my manager, I know that I've got appointments coming up, right? I don't know when they're going to be, but they're going to take this amount of time because I need time to travel to the appointment. The appointment's likely to take however long it takes, and I need to travel back. So I think I'm going to be doing this however many times over the course of the next couple of months. I'm going to make sure that I had this conversation with my manager, I'm going to make sure that I organize my diary around those appointments. I'm going to make sure that I can stay after work and make up for that time. So there has to be some responsibility for the employee to also prepare and to say to their manager, this is how I'm going to accommodate, this is what I'm going to do to accommodate these appointments as well. And then it's a bit more of a two-way conversation, whereas it doesn't have to just be the manager saying, right, this is how we're going to move everything around. It's a two-way conversation. Yeah. But also you have to remember as well that these are medical appointments. So it's not like a cosmetic appointment. It's not like somebody's going off to do something that's fun. I think sometimes we do have to recognize that if an employee needs to take time out for a medical appointment, we have to be able to bend and flex around that, because if it was something else that wasn't fertility and they had to go to hospital for another medical reason, you'd have to accommodate that as well. So sometimes we have to think about it. We have to put some thought around it.
Yeah, well put there, Jade. I don't have any of the questions in the box. What I do have is a lovely comment, Jade, which I will forward on to you, just to say thank you very much for speaking beautifully about such a sensitive topic. So many people have experienced some of the issues we've spoken about. And I think about many of the principles you've spoken about apply to other sensitive issues. So that is a learning from today's session. So thank you very much for questions. If anybody does have any questions, then obviously please feel free to add them in the chat now. If anybody wants to get in contact with Jade, Jade's contact details are here. These will be shared out to everybody on the session. And like I said, the session has been recorded. So please do get in touch with Jade. Jade, thank you so much it's a very hot topic. It's very important that we do talk about it. Like I've said before, I mean, the reason why we're doing it today is because it's something that it's talked about. It's happened within my friendship group. You don't know until you know somebody going through a situation like this. And I think it's really important that we share the message, that we're really open. And if we are having issues, we reach out to people like yourself to talk about it, because like people say, problem halved is problem shared. Yeah. Problem shared is problem halved, I should say. So I think it is important that we do have these conversations, and it's about opening up communication, talking about it, and somebody you know might be going through a similar situation, and you can have that dialogue, because there will be people that you don't want to tell, you don't want to speak to about it, and there'll be your confidants who have gone through the process and have that more information about what's going on. So I think thank you very much, Jade, for being open and honest and sharing your story with us.
You're so welcome. Welcome.
An absolute great session. Thank you so much, everybody who's joined us. Jade's details will be sent out, like I said before, but I think it's been an excellent session. Thank you so much, Jade, for taking part. And any questions, any concern, please do reach out to myself and Jade. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. We will let you have the extra 3 minutes back, and we'll hopefully chat soon. Oh, I think I've got another question, Jade, just quickly. Great session. That's all I want to know. Great session. We're glad we're going to have some. Hopefully, everybody's going to go back to their teams this afternoon and going, "Do you know about this? Do you know about this? How would you deal with this situation?" Because we all need to be talking about it.
Exactly. While they're doing that, I'll sort my dog out as well.
Exactly, sort your dog out, and I'm going to have a chat to the boys on my teams, because they could be happening to them. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like I said, it does happen to men as well as women. But thank you so much, Jade. I am going to disconnect. It's been lovely to chat. Have a great day, everybody, and Jade, thanks again for sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.
You're welcome. Take care.